Today we are going to dive deep into an essential part of JavaScript functions. We will explore what they are, their syntax, how to invoke them, and why they are so crucial in programming. So let's get started. First off, let's understand what a function is. A JavaScript function is a reusable block of code designed to perform a specific task. Function offers numerous advantages in programming. They enhance code organization, promote code reuse, and simplify complex tasks. And the syntax for defining a function is straightforward. You begin with a function keyword followed by the function name, which can follow the rules for naming variables. Then we have parameters enclosed in parentheses to specify inputs. Then the function logic is placed within these curly braces. And this is the syntax of writing function in JavaScript. Now let's delve further into functions parameter and their significance in JavaScript. When defining a JavaScript function, you can include parameters within these parentheses, and these parameters serve as a placeholders for values that you want to pass to the function. Parameters are vital for creating flexible and reusable functions. Parameters are like entry point to your function. They allow you to provide input values to the function which it can then use to perform specific actions or calculations. Think of them as a variable that hold the values passed to the function. These values can be of any data type. It can be numbers, strings, objects, or even other functions. For instance, consider a function that calculates the area of a triangle. Now to create this function, first of all, I am going to use function keyword, then the function name, which in my case I am using is area triangle. Then we need to use parentheses, and in these parentheses we are going to add parameters, and we can name these parameter whatever we want. In my case, I am going to use two parameters. First one is width and the second one I am calling it height. Then we need to use double brackets, and in here I am going to create a variable for storing the result of this calculation. So let result is equal to width multiplied by this height, and after this I just want to log this result variable so we can see the result in our console. Now first of all I am going to run my live server. Now after opening our developer console, you can see we don't have anything in our developer console, because in order to use this function we need to call this, and we can call function by using its name, which is area triangle, and then simply by using these parentheses. And as you can see, we are getting this nan, which stands for not a number, because in this function we are using parameters, and if we use parameter in our function, these are like variables. And now we need to assign values to variable in this function call. And in between these parentheses, we are going to add two values because we are using two parameters. The first value that I am going to use is 3, which is for width, and we need to use another value which is for height. And here I am giving a value of 4. Now again, because we are using two parameters, that is why we need to give this function two values. First value is for this width and second value is for this height. And after hitting save, you can see we have the result which is 12. This is how we can create a function and we can get the output of the function by calling the function using its name and then using these parentheses, and in these parentheses we need to add the value if we are using parameters. Now let's talk more about these parameters. So maybe you are thinking when to use these parameters. We can use these parameters when we want to create dynamic, reusable function that can work with different data. And we should use parameters in functions when our function needs external data to perform its task. Like in this function, we can give any value that we want because of these parameters. If we don't use these parameters, then we need to hard code these values like 4 and 3. And then if we are not using parameters, then we don't need to add these values. Now because we are not using parameters, this function is not so reusable. And as you can see here, we are now not using parameters. And because we are not using parameters, that is why we hard coded these values, which is 4 and 3. And now we can't provide this function any value that we want. This function just calculate 4 multiplied by 3. But if we want to make this function more reusable, then we need to add parameters. After adding these, we can use this function and we can provide any value that we like while calling this function. In summary, functions parameters are fundamentals to making functions adaptable, versatile, and reusable. They provide a way to pass data into functions, allowing it to perform specific tasks based on provided values like we are providing in this example. This flexibility and modularity make them a critical concept in JavaScript programming. Now while calling our function, we are using these two values, and these values are called arguments. And these are the actual values or expressions passed to a function when it is called. They are specific values that are provided as inputs to the function. And in our example, these values are called arguments. And these parameters are placeholder for these values. Now functions can return values using the return statement. When a function encounters a return, it halts and sends the value back. Functions can return value using the return statement. Like in this example, we were logging the result variable using our console.log to see the output. But instead, we can use this return keyword and then this will return any variable from this function that we want. For example, if we want to return this result, we can use return keyword, and after this we are going to add the name of our variable that we want to return from this function. And now you can see we don't have any result in our console. Now to see the output of this function, we need to use console.log, and in this console.log we are going to add this function. Now we have our result, which is 12 in our console, and this is how we can use this return keyword in our function to return any value. Now keep in mind, when we use this return keyword, any line of code after this return keyword will not be executed. Let me show you. If I console.log I am line after return keyword. Now after hitting save, you can see this console.log is not executed. And also our VS Code is not highlighting this line of code, because when we use return keyword in our function, then our function will return from that line of code where we are using the return keyword. And anything that we write after this return keyword will not be executed. And that is why we are not seeing the result of this console.log. And this is the proof that any line of code that we use after this return keyword will not be executed. So basically, this function will return from here where we use this return keyword. And then this will output only this result and then return from here. Now function can be used like variables. You can assign them to variables or use them as argument for other functions. And here is an example of how we can store the function into a variable. To store a function into a variable, we need to use our let keyword or const keyword. After this, we need to use the name that we want to give to our function, which in my case is add. After this, we need to use this equal to sign, then function keyword, and after writing this function keyword, just use parentheses. And in this function, for addition, I need to pass this function two values. So here I am using num1 and num2. And again, you can call these parameters whatever you like. And then this function will only return num1 plus num2 like this. Now to call this function, we first need to use console.log. Then in here the name of the function, which is add. So here I am using add, then parentheses, and in these parentheses we need to use values for this num1 and this num2. So the first value is 4 and the second one I am using is 2. Now if I hit save, you can see the result in our console, which is 6. And this is how we can store functions in variables. And at last, when you declare a variable within a function, it becomes local to that function. It's only accessible within the function, ensuring no conflicts with variables in global scope. Now to understand this, let's store this num1 and num2 into a variable. Let result is equal to num1 plus num2. And now the variable that we just created in our function has a local scope because we cannot use this variable outside of this function. Let's say if we want to log the value of this result outside of this function, you can see we are getting an error that result is not defined because this variable has a local scope. And variables that we create outside of a function have a global scope, mean we can use those variables wherever we want. And the variable that we declare inside a function, we cannot access outside of that function. Now if we want to use that variable outside of our function, we need to return that variable like return result. Now after returning this result variable from this function, we can easily use the value of this result variable if we want. Like if we want to add another value to this result variable, we can simply do like this. Let x is equal to 4 plus add. And then in here I am just providing any values. Now after hitting save, we just need to log the value to the console. Now you can see 3 plus 4 is 7 and we are adding 4 to this. And that is why we have the result of 11 in our console. And this is how we can return a variable from a function and then we can use that anywhere in our code. Now to finish this lecture, I just want to show you one last example. Now here I am creating a function and the name of this function is even. And I am creating this function to check a number that it is even or not. Now to make this function more reusable, we need to add a parameter so we can check any number that we want. After this, I am using if statement, and here I am saying that if number modulo 2 is equal to 0, then console.log this number is even. Otherwise, return this number is odd. And now I am going to use this function for any number to check if that number is even or that number is odd. Now to test this function, we need to call this function is even, and then we need to provide the value that we want to test. Let's first check for 2. If I hit save, you can see our function is working perfectly. And this function is telling us that this number is even because in this function we uses if else statement, and we just provided the condition that if number modulo 2 is equal to 0, means that if we divide the number that we provide here with 2, have a reminder equal to 0, then console.log this. Otherwise, if that number have any reminder, if we divide with 2, then console.log this line of code. And by doing this, we just created a function which will check any number. And we just simply need to provide the number like 4. You can see this number is even. If we provide 3, perfect, this number is odd. Now without this function, you will need to manually perform the modulo operation to determine if a number is even or odd. Now let's say we want to check different numbers that they are even or not, but without using this function. Then we will need to manually perform these operations for each and every number. For example, if we want to check 2 is even or not, we will need to do this. Let num1 is equal to 2, and then we need to create result variable. Let result is equal to num1 modulo 2 is equal to 0. And after this we have to console.log the result variable, and this will return true as you can see in our console because 2 is even number. And after this, if we want to check for another number, we need to repeat all these lines of code. Like if we want to check 4, we need to change it to 4. Then here we need to change the name like this. And we need to do all of this for each and every number that we want to check. But if we use functions, then instead of doing all this again and again, we can create a function and then we can pass that any value that we want to check without writing all this logic again and again. And these are the advantages of using functions in our code. In conclusion, functions are essential building blocks in JavaScript, simplifying code and promoting reusability. Understanding their syntax, invocations, and advantages is crucial for writing efficient, maintainable code. Additionally, functions can encapsulate logic, enhancing code organization and reducing conflicts with local variable scope. I hope you found this exploration of JavaScript functions helpful. If you did, give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more exciting web development tutorials. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Keep coding, keep creating, and I will see you in the next video.